My name is Polly Braden, and I have the current exhibition at the Foundling Museum called Leaving Ukraine. So just to say a little bit about the exhibition follows 6 people over 2 years. I first met a group of them in Moldova in March 2022, and a group in Poland in just about a month later in 2022. And started to work with this group of people, photographing them, following their stories, getting to know them. They started to make some work themselves, making diary entries. And the idea was really to try to follow the women and children, because of martial law, it was women and children who left Ukraine, to try to follow the women and children who were leaving Ukraine as they started to set up new lives across Europe, and to try and stick with those people and discover how their lives changed over the course of, well, I followed them for 2 years. Of course, at the time, we thought that the war would just maybe carry on. Well, they thought just for a few weeks, but now 2 years on, sadly, the war is still carrying on. So I followed these women and children for 2 years as they started new schools, as the mothers had to manage the local bureaucracy, working out housing, schooling, work, everything that there is to start a new life. And often, of course, those women had given up jobs that they have taken years and years to settle into, to work towards. So they gave up their status in Ukraine, really to look after the next generation of Ukrainians. As well as the older generation who often left with them. So one of the stories I thought was really interesting was about 3 young people, because when I went to Moldova, many of the young people there were still doing online learning in Ukraine. Some were in local schools as well. And then when I went to Poland, people were sitting in refugee camps still doing online learning in school with their teachers in Ukraine. And then other people had settled into different schools across Europe. But the Ukrainians teachers carried on teaching either in a hybrid form, where the kids would go to a local school and then do online learning in the evenings with their Ukrainian school, or just do full-time online learning. And of course, we had all experienced online learning with our children through lockdown. So these kids had also been through lockdown and were still online learning. It felt really important to try and track what that looked like, what that was going to feel like for the kids, and what that meant to Ukrainians for their future. So I found 3 schoolgirls from one school in Ukraine called Mykolaiv, the town is called Mykolaiv, and they were all 16 when I met them, Sophia, Yulia, and Alessia, and they were really good friends. And through them, I could tell the story of them and their parents as they moved. And well, actually, I thought that they would move to one country, then stay there. But what really happened was they moved from one country to the next country to the next country, because it's really hard to settle. So they're now 18, and the kids made lots of the footage themselves. I'm still in touch with them, and they all came over for the exhibition, which was really lovely.
Hi, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here among all of you. And my name is Amina, and I'm a young citizen with Coram since, I think, December 2021, if I'm not wrong. So it's been a long time on the project. The project is very unique, and it really has given me a lot of insight into people's stories and people's lives and their journeys. And something that Polly said that was very interesting was because it's difficult to settle. And over the years that I've been here and have been an asylum seeker, I've kind of tried to find a way to channel my art of the unsettled, if it makes sense, and put it out there as much as I can, as much as my situation permits to do so. So it basically reflecting my life story and my journey as well. So how does it artistically feel to be constrained, to have time limits, to have geographical limits, and to, you know, as Polly put it as well, so the art of the unsettled in a way for me, yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Marianne Lagrue. I am a policy manager at Coram Children's Legal Centre, working specifically on a project that helps migrant and refugee children, young people and families to not just find status in the UK, but campaign to make that status more available to everyone who arrives in the UK who wasn't born here. The Migrant Children's Project has worked with Coram's young citizens for a long time, and we're really proud of the project. It's won awards. The young people who are involved are absolutely extraordinary. And one thing that really struck me about what you just said, Amina, about the art of the unsettled, is that we sort of deal in the power of the unsettled, because young people, no matter where they're born, can be such a force for change and such a force for good in the world. And so what we're trying to do is harness the power and the energy of young people, sometimes trapped in a system that not only does not make the most of their skills, their talents, their education, but deliberately damps it down and deliberately traps them in a sort of limbo. So one way that CCLC loves to do that is by teaching young people their rights and having a kind of child rights starting point for everything that we do. It's very easy, I think, when people think about refugees to relapse into a kind of framing that is about vulnerability. And that's real. Asylum seekers in the UK are increasingly in this madly precarious situation and kept right on the fringes of society, and in this level of precarity, which is almost unsustainable for anyone, let alone a child. But there's another way of looking at it too, and that's that all children in the UK have rights, and all refugees in the UK have rights, and beginning from a position of teaching people what their rights are and letting those young people be the ambassadors for that power, that legal force for good, can be a real way of improving the system. So that's what we try to do. We work in 3 different levels at CCLC. The first is that we help individuals through outreach services, through an advice line, and most importantly, really, through just representing children and young people in their asylum and immigration claims, day in and day out, a team of lawyers just representing young people in their legal battles. And then we work to try and change the system that young people exist within. So Polly, you mentioned schools. We deliver training to social workers, to educators, to medical professionals who might come across children and young people and not understand what their rights are. And lastly, we push for systemic change at a national level.
Well, I suppose, just one thing that struck me from what you were saying there is, one of the things that I wanted to try to reframe is that when you have images of war, what you see often is the front line, the strong people on the front line, and then you see the vulnerable people, refugees in in puffer jackets, holding children and crying on borders. And I wanted to try to show women as the strong people as well, because they're the ones who have to go and rebuild and work through all of this complicated bureaucracy in a new language often, but not only do that, but do that carrying 2, 3 children, their nieces, their nephews, their grandparents, find housing. So I wanted to try, through spending time with people over a long time, they might start off, sure, tired and that image of, the refugee, but given opportunity. And the thing that you also said about a dead end being locked into this situation where you can't move forward, one of the families that I photographed was a mum and a daughter. So Leanna's 21 when she arrived, and she's actually gone to work for a law firm in London. And her mum was 50, and her mum was a sign language interpreter in Ukraine, and quite famous on the news in the Ukrainian on Ukrainian news. And she had to leave that and hoped that she could find work in Italy as a sign language interpreter. So she was learning Italian sign language, which is different to Ukrainian and Italian language. But she was moved from, they moved all of the refugees in Italy from Mantova, who were living in different houses all over Mantova, to, they were told one night the buses arrived and they were told that they were all being moved to Pisa. But actually they went past Pisa and ended up in Salice Terme, this place, which is a holiday resort in Italy, into a hotel that wasn't really a hotel, it's just a building with several rooms along a corridor. And then more people were arrived and they had to bunk up with 4 or 5 people in a room. and they were given €2.50 a day. They were not given, they couldn't choose their food. They were given food. There was no work in the town. So she became dependent. There was no way for her to move forward, but she's incredibly able. And now I know she's back in Ukraine now, back on the news and helping people and doing her work. In the meantime, Liena, because she was younger and people wanted to help her because she spoke English, which obviously helped, but also because she was young and 21 and just everyone wanted to help her. She got a job within a few weeks in a law firm in London and is now earning, really good money, paying her taxes. She's had a child. And that was just really striking how that could have happened in England as well. You might be moved to a hotel, but it was really striking how, given opportunity, someone can really thrive.
A note on what you just said, Polly, about translation. Amina will have opinions on this, I'm sure, but one thing that I find absolutely remarkable about working with teenagers and young people in their early 20s who have come to the UK through forced migration routes is how much of the time they spend being both literal and cultural translators for their loved ones, and also for new arrivals. It's very common indeed to see young people, children, really quite young children, translating for parents, translating for their grandparents, not just in kind of day-to-day interactions, but in really serious, really weighty matters like dealing with the state, dealing with landlords, dealing with medical professionals if their caregiver is ill. And there's something about the position of claiming asylum and traveling that I think means that young people often assume the role of carer in a way for the older people around them, because they're able to adapt that much more quickly, because maybe they're able to pick up the language faster. Puts a lot of pressure on young people and means that although they do have opportunities that adults that maybe their parents or grandparents wouldn't have in the same position, they also don't have the freedom to be young in the way that their peers in England, for example, might be young.
Yeah. I mean, Liena was 21, so for her, but I saw that many, many times over, actually, young people who, after 2 years, young people have learned a language fluently. One of the people that I've worked with, Sophia, she now speaks, she spoke Ukrainian, Russian, and English anyway. She now speaks Polish as well, German, Swiss German, and Italian, and fluently, like, and she is doing a lot of the work for home. She's incredibly mature, and she has a younger cousin who lives with them, and her mum is still learning German, at a much slower pace. And her mum is now working in a bakery and night shifts in this bakery to pay for her daughter and her niece. But definitely Sophia is having to do all the work around the bureaucracy of working things out for their family. But her mum is also incredibly strong, but she does not have the language skills.
I wanted to say something that came up. Obviously, as Marianne said, I do have opinions on this. And Polly kind of said that thankfully that young person is 21, so they have a lot of time and so on. It's just great to see how many people help the young people, etc. But 21 doesn't feel young when a lot of years have been robbed from you. It doesn't, in my experience. I am 24 now. That does not feel young, and I feel like a lot has been stolen from me. And I feel like that same child that I was when I arrived, and when I had to take care of my siblings, and be a translator, a single mom, and I had to be a young carer, and so much was on my shoulders that when you look yourself in the mirror, you can barely notice the difference, because the person that you were is lost, and the person that you're looking forward to being is nowhere in sight because of how stagnant you've been for that long time. I think there is, for us, the generation that is in our 20s, true, on the books we are young, right? But it feels like we're carrying so much experience with us. So we're carrying both the challenge of having to learn things fast paced because that's what's expected of us, but also unlearn things that our parents embedded on us, our traditions, our cultures, our mentalities, the feeling of never being good enough, the feeling of never being fast enough. I had a discussion with my brother the other day who, due to the state of stagnancy, is finding it useful, despite his, shining grades, to go to university. And I know that this is the kind of country that gives so many options despite the traditional route. You can go on to so many directions. But for us, you have to give yourself every chance. Like you need to have every card in your hand. And I always say to my siblings, you need to work extra hard. You need to be extra fast. You need to do extra, extra, extra. And at the end of the day, I realize how extra much is taken away from us. And we find ourselves mourning the children that we were, that no one took care of. And a safe place to put them to bed in would be movements like this and initiatives like this and art. And it is sad that the many mentalities that we came with, our cultures, our traditions, do not favor that safe space, but they favor speed and efficiency and overachieving and feeling safe before something catches up to you, whether it's, you know, a normal monotonous life, because that we have to strive for excellence, right? We have to do 10 times what everyone else does, because we're running from something, and the only way we know how to keep going is to keep running. And it is really inspiring and nice, really, to see that there are initiatives and movements for people who can find safe space in art, in all forms of art, be it visual or otherwise. And I wish that we would have more schemes, and I wish that we would have more funding, and I wish that we would have more people like the people in this room to include all the people who don't understand how important it is to have a safe space and be who you really are, and not just with yourself, but with a child that you're mourning, and with everything that you have carried so far, that the wonderful people that are around you as your support system can help you offload a little bit. And that's what happened to me, because I have Marianne on this call, and that's what she's been to me. So it's really important. It's really inspiring to see this as well.
That's so powerful, Amina. Absolutely astonishing. You can articulate that kind of all of those complicated, conflicting emotions and circumstances. The interesting thing that I would say about the way that the law plays into all of that is that there are real differences. There are real differences in UK policy, and we fight those differences because they're unjust. But there's this narrative of the good migrant and the bad migrant, the good refugee and the bad refugee. And what I hear Amina saying about the kind of cultural expectation or the circumstantial expectation of going above and beyond, being excellent at all things all the time because that's the expectation, that's kind of also baked into the way that the UK offers its welcome to people, including children, that says, well, you are welcome, but the welcome is always contingent. You know, there's always we can always rescind the welcome if you're not the kind of person that we want you to be as a country. And that feeling of circumscription, of being trapped in a box, is deadly to young people, but deadly to anyone that, you know, that is a sort of fully embodied, creative, conflicting, contradictory human being. But there's an additional layer which is really difficult. It was wonderful to see the UK open our collective arms to Ukrainian refugees, to millions of people fleeing a really desperate situation, and so many of them being mothers, so many of them being children and the elderly. But when we opened the Ukrainian refugee scheme, we deliberately didn't ask Ukrainians to go through the existing asylum system in the UK. And that's because the asylum system is so broken, so dysfunctional, so prone to years and years of delay, of adversarial kind of conflict and really sort of difficult, litigious processes, that it just wasn't appropriate to say, well, we welcome you and this is the system that we welcome you with, which is exactly what we do to people coming from so many places, you know, coming from Sudan, coming from Iraq, coming from Afghanistan a lot of the time. All of those people go through this completely dysfunctional system. And at the same time, when the Ukrainians arrived, it was recognized, it was obvious that we couldn't possibly say with one hand, we completely understand your plight and we welcome you. And on the other hand, say, so we're going to treat you like we treat everybody else. And the lesson in that, because there are real lessons, isn't that we were wrong to be as welcoming to the Ukrainians as we were, because of course we weren't. And actually, compared to many other European countries, we put more bureaucracy in place before Ukrainians could even arrive. But it's to say, if our welcome, our kind of traditional welcome for people fleeing persecution, is so unfit for purpose that we don't use it in a moment of crisis, it's not fit for purpose. And we need to sort of start from the bottom and rebuild something which works, which says, we welcome you. We understand that you have talents and skills. We'll give you the right to work. We'll give you the right to claim asylum. We'll let UK families offer their goodwill and support to you, because the UK public is really welcoming and does want to help people, you know? And there's no way of doing that if you are a child asylum seeker coming from Iran because you are LGBTQI and you're not safe in your home country. And so, you know, your mother sells the field at the end of the garden and pays the trafficker to take you to the UK in a really dangerous journey because you're not safe where you are. Why should we not be able to welcome that young person in exactly the same way as we might offer a welcome to someone who's maybe from a little bit closer to home?
When the war in Ukraine started, we were all asked to be political, oddly, because we were all asked to side with those who are going through something difficult, side with human suffering. And human suffering knows no politics. It just is, and it's just happening, and it's vibrant and powerful and loud, and it should be loud, and it shouldn't be mutilated, and it shouldn't be silenced, and it should be out there, whether it's, you know, through being in a poster or being you know, printed all over buses all over London, or if the whole of London is covered in yellow and blue. And it was amazing to see how every, you know, a country came together to showcase that. And us, on the other hand, who, you know, we do not wear yellow and blue. We're from different countries. Some of us look a different way. Some of us have a different story. But we also reflect our sometimes mutilated and sometimes silent pain through, you know, what the stories in our eyes, through the scars in our bodies, through, you know, the miles and miles we've walked and the journeys we've embarked and the dangers that we've fled from. And we carry that with us, even though it's not through posters or through shirts and through donation pages and so on. That is for us to carry. And we entered this kind of dance of, when we first came here, all of us, of beggars can't be choosers. And if we are in a position where we cannot choose, those who give can, to be kind or to abuse. Abuse is a big word. And as a refugee, you learn to not be scared of big words, because you have to be the one to use them, because if you don't, who will? And we found ourselves, like I have felt so many times and still feel, like a reference number, you know, like a code, like a case study. And that goes to show how powerful the initiatives of storytelling are. And it's great to start from any place, really. So it's great to start from Ukraine, or it's great to start from Iran, or it's great to start from Iraq, or wherever. It's great to start. It's great for it to happen. Whatever happens is great for it to happen. So while we were happy that it was happening, we were all wondering, so you were capable of it. It could have happened. So you did have the tools to do it. So it wasn't all the kindness that you were extending to us. And we had to be grateful because, again, beggars can be choosers. It was this system that was spread in trinkets of hope that were then, that we would wear because that was the only thing we could wear, and then it would be dismantled from us bit by bit every step of the way. And it's not the journey and the weight that hurts more than when you're done and when you can feel safe, you don't know how to do that anymore. Because now you've become this case study, because now your sentences and words on top of each other that tell a story on black and white, because now when you express about, like, tell your story about your traumas and what you've been through or what your friends have been through or what you've witnessed, you say it as if you're talking to another doctor, another social worker, another lawyer, another policeman. You just become this broken record of a story that once was your life. I really worry about how asylum system is affecting young people, seeing my siblings and myself while it's happening in our lives. But more so, I worry of the broken adults that enter a world that is clearly already broken. When I'm Albanian, and currently we're the boogeyman of the media, so being Albanian, I constantly say, aren't you afraid that you're slowly creating the adults that you are fearing? People who don't believe in the system, people who don't respect the system, people who don't think that they can be better and do better. I've asked a friend that I was translating for a long time ago, why would you do this? We went to the same school together, and he was a really good student, really good in sciences, always wanted to be a physician. And I asked him, why are you doing these things? Like, why are you getting in trouble? And he just looked at me and said, Amina, look at me. Do you think I have another choice? And even if you lay it out in front of me and you say, it's easy now, walk on this road, I can't anymore because they've taken everything from me. I was talking to the family therapist that is working with our family the other day, and I was saying, we come from such intricate and sometimes horrible and horrific situations that were used of bad things happening, like, stabbing at us like sharp knives. But it's the twist of that knife within your chest, sorry to be gore, constantly, that's what really hurts. And I understand you're keeping that knife in so that I don't bleed out. But I'd rather you take it out or finish me with it than keep me in such agony. So it's really nice to see that there are young people that are helped constantly. And it's the reason why it's powerful from my perspective is that it's a testimony of what we can actually do and what can be done in this country, and that systems are in place. And it helps refugees, young refugees, transition from, I'll just take what I'm given, to I'm a young person and I have rights. And that's a very powerful transition that organizations like Coram, for example, help do. When some of us pay more taxes than we should because there's been a glitch, we don't go to ask, hey, can you fix this for me? Because we think we're meant to be giving constantly. We're meant to be taken for granted. We're meant to just sit back and say, okay, fine. Because if you're taking someone's job as per the headlines, you have to prove that you're there for a reason, even if it cuts into your personal life, your personal time, your personal efforts. If you're told to be in a space because of someone's kindness, not because you deserve it, you have to do everything in your power to show that you've deserved it. You have to be this amazing person that everyone nods at you and says, yeah, that's why they're here. But you cannot live on as a young person striving for people's nods, because one, that's unhealthy, and two, it's impossible, and three, as an adult, who will you then be if you haven't approved yourself, but you're seeking the approval of others? And it's not a warm approval either. It's just, okay, you can be here. And that's not good enough.
I think the thing that most strikes me here is, I'm not like Amina, it is not my story I'm telling. So my real job is just to be a vessel through which someone else can tell their story. And that really has to be a massive collaboration. So my job really is just to be able to listen and to be there and to know, to build a relationship so they feel comfortable and can tell their own story in their own way. So the best way to do that in a way was through film, because then all the young people could just speak straight to camera. And I think that they all came to the exhibition and they enjoyed the process and felt quite proud to be telling their story, which is obviously they understand a much bigger story than just their story. And they were dotted all across Europe. So in a way, I was the one coming and seeing them, and then they would talk to each other on a Zoom through things that we could set up together, and then they would come together in the UK. And one of the parts of the story that they filmed completely themselves is in the summer last year. They'd all graduated from school, and they wanted to come back together to celebrate, which for me was such an interesting part of a story about being young, and it's quite a hopeful part of just being human. That and I guess they were lucky that they could go back to Ukraine, but they decided, even though Mykolaiv was being bombed in the days leading up to the prom, their parents, they couldn't go to their school because it had been bombed, but their parents organised, their mums organised a prom for them, and 25 out of 27 people in their class came back to Mykolaiv and danced together. And Sophia went all the way into Ukraine to get her prom dress, which is like this gold dress, but she traveled for 25 hours by bus into Ukraine, tried a dress on, then 25 hours back out of Ukraine to get the right dress, because that's what matters when you're 17 years old. And so this is just quite a joyful part of, what it is to be young and how you really just want to come back together. You want to be with your peers, you want to celebrate those important moments and to see each other and go through those transitions together.
For me, I've always struggled since I was young, because I saw that I could, when you start painting or drawing or doing any form of visual art, you discover that you can do lots of things. And it's very difficult coming from mentalities and cultures where you're expected to not be very contemporary or very radical, or experiment much with your art. The traditional way is the best way. So coming to the UK has really been interesting, learning how you can make art out of really anything. And I've kind of landed in this little self-made utopia of mine, where I'm really keen to continue to utilize people's stories as my niche. I'm just an amateur. I don't think I have a niche yet, but if it makes sense, because I think, as Polly said as well, that's the most powerful. So some time ago, Marianne has seen this piece, I think, made this very big board, where I kind of painted a globe at the back and painted people's faces on phones, and stuck the phones on there, which kind of reflected the faces of the pandemic, meaning how we disconnected during the pandemic, and we all spread all around the world, but we still stayed connected to each other. And I found it very interesting, because only your phone would see your face at the time, because you'd have your mask on. So when people see a piece, especially when you're using storytelling incorporated into your art, it's very important to give spotlight to young artists or artists, which is something that Polly is doing, or to give spotlight to stories, to, as she said, like, she's a vessel to the stories that she's bringing forward. And that project actually was one where I would meet people with refugee backgrounds, and they would give me their old phones to recycle into little paintings. And I'd take pictures of them and they would tell me their stories. So every little phone, and there's over 80 of them, has a little story behind. And it's a real journey to also give perspective to what you have been through, and to utilize a tool to give yourself a voice. Asylum seekers, refugees, and migrants often come forward, as I said, with mutilated stories that aren't really given a voice. Even when we go to court to appeal our cases, we need someone to speak on our behalf. We cannot tell our own story. And often telling our story honestly is not the politically correct way of saying it to appease a certain audience. So there are so many bureaucracies in place that create barriers for these genuine and powerful stories to be amplified and to be echoed into forever, really, because they should. So, and like people like Marianne or Polly or you yourself, Emma, being here, it's very great to have these people who fight our corner and give us a voice. And art is a tool like that. It's a way to give myself a voice. So it's a way for me to say something without me saying something, because there's a lot of limitations that at different times me saying, so all people who are asylum seekers or refugees cannot say what we really think or what we want to say. Which really brings the question, freedom of speech, how free are we really? And those are big questions that we explore in initiatives like Young Citizens or art or any type of movement and initiative like this. So yeah, for me it has been that I think storytelling is most crucial in art, because it's another tool that gives those stories a voice. We often go to, my brother said the other week when we were talking to our family social worker, I'm gonna need you to reflect what I've been through for the past 4 years, because I cannot say it myself. You have to say it for me. So we need to make use of the systems of support to speak on our behalf.
There's an added thing of amplifying that voice, right? So one thing I know that I could do for the kids is I could get it into the museum, into magazines and newspapers, to remember that this is still an ongoing case. And I hope it also does reflect not only the Ukrainian story, but for other people arriving in the UK or in different countries, and what that's like for them. I hope that that it goes beyond the Ukrainian story, even though it is different because they've been given different opportunities when they arrived.
That's really interesting, both of you. I think the kind of, on the one hand, the slight friction between the kind of universal story of dislocation and people's individual stories and their right to tell them. What I really was struck by when you spoke, Amina, was when you talked about the story being mangled and not being able to speak for yourself even at court. And it's true that the process of what the UK asylum system wants from anyone, a young person claiming asylum, is their story in as detailed and accurate and delineated a way as possible. And when you're telling your story to try and prove you are a refugee, you can't just tell your story and all of its complexity and all of your multiplicities. You instead have to prove something very, very specific. One of the strengths of the UK welcome of Ukrainians was that we just welcomed any Ukrainian that wanted to come. It was acknowledged that by virtue of being Ukrainian, you were at risk if you tried to stay where you were born, where you lived. But if you are claiming asylum from anywhere else, if you're going through the formal asylum system in the UK, you have to prove that you are a victim of persecution. And not just in general, it has to be persecution to you personally on the basis of one of 5 reasons that are set out in the in the 1951 Refugee Convention. And so that's race, religion, political opinion, nationality, and membership of a particular social group. And that membership of a social group one is a category that's really been more and more heavily used over time, because the mostly white, male, quite elderly lawyers writing the Refugee Convention in 1950 weren't really thinking about people who were gay or people who had gender, like non-conforming gender identity and lots of other things. But then once you've done that We've translated your story into this very fixed box of proving your persecution. You then have to maintain that fixity. There's no room for personal growth. You can't, while the system is ongoing, you can't change. If you're claiming asylum based on your political opinion, a political opinion has to remain fixed. Nuance is seen as weakness. And you really have to just keep quiet, keep everything on lockdown, not have social media, you know, prove that you are as sort of small and static as possible. I think you used the word stasis, Amina, and it's completely true. You have to just sort of freeze in place with that story frozen in place for the duration of time it takes for you to claim asylum. Your story can't change, your story can't develop. And if that took a few weeks, that would be one thing. But the UK asylum system, as Amina sadly knows, takes years. There are young people we work with who have been waiting for their asylum claim to be decided for more than 5 years. And in that time, they're completely in stasis. And the story that they're telling is still the story of them 5 years ago, leaving their country of origin for whatever reasons they were to leave. Everything that happened subsequently, any desire for personal growth, any relationships you build, any life that you develop, your education, your friendships, your personal growth as a human being doesn't count for anything. And that is a real flaw in the system, I think, because it means that your storytelling is mangled. It is mutilated, which is exactly the right word, I mean.
It's interesting though, isn't it, that even with, you know, the open doors of, especially, you know, in the UK, we did have some kind of, well, you had to find someone on a Facebook page who liked you to come and live in your home. So there was some filter, whereas the rest of Europe, you know, there was no filter. People cross borders and that. But it is interesting, even with that, and even with being then allowed to stay without, it's so hard to settle, and that's without all these other barriers. So, you know, because you arrive in a country and you essentially put a pin on a map and go, okay, that might be good. And then you might end up in a village where there's no transport to a local school, and you might need to work, but there's nowhere for you to go and work near enough where you can get back to school at 3 o'clock. And you don't have a car because you don't have a car because you arrived from Ukraine. So, you know, even when you don't have all the other issues that you've just been speaking about, it's still so hard to settle often, and so much to do with luck and relationships that you might form. And that's not even including having to go through the courts and go through all the horror that you're speaking about.
Luck is really the thing. And although with Ukrainians arriving in the UK, it was sort of that sponsorship, sponsorship system at the beginning for asylum seekers arriving from other places. For unaccompanied children, there's something called the National Transfer Scheme, and for adults, this dispersal program, which can ship you off to hotels, secure accommodation, detention centres sometimes all over the country. And for the children that we work with, you know, the problems with that method of dispersing people evenly around the country is they're really stark. Because if, for example, you need a translator who speaks your language, if you need a legal aid lawyer, if you need access to a particular kind of church or mosque, if you would love to have a community group of people who understand your cultural background and your whole world of frame of reference up to that point, it just might not be there if you're suddenly finding yourself in Cornwall, say, or in a Scottish island, which plenty of asylum seekers have done. Although those places often offer some of the warmest welcomes, there's no infrastructure there necessarily to help people to access the services that they need, because we've built a system where, you know, an awful lot of quite technical support, like legal aid lawyers, are needed in order for people to begin the process of settling. And even then, that doesn't take into account any of the kind of the softer integration that you, I think, are referencing, Polly, the way that, you know, people need access to the kinds of jobs that they want. They need access to the kinds of ways of building skills, and maybe they need access to something that feels like home.
But I suppose the other thing is that those places are shut, so it's very hard for journalists, for story makers to go in and tell those stories as well. So you can just shut the door, and the kids are in detention centres, and no one can get access to go and tell those stories to show how hard it is.
Amina and I.
It's dangerous for people to tell their story while they're waiting as well, right?
Yeah.
There are safe ways to tell stories, and as the responsible adults who are professionals that approach us, I'm sure that there are a lot of tools and a lot of ways to tell those stories in a safe way, in an anonymous way. And we don't mind anonymously shouting the truth, and we don't mind telling our stories. Actually, we want our stories to be told because, as I said, we're more than just reference numbers, and we want our stories out there, and we want to see more recognition. So it's not us who make it difficult to go into detention centers. It's not us who keep our community centers shut, or it's not us who are too concerned about sharing our stories anonymously. Has it been sometimes for me in my mind frightening to tell my story in my position? Yes, definitely. But I have to because it's all I have and it's all I've carried with me from one piece of land to another. Um, and so I think from these people who fight our corner and from these people who've made it their lives to pursue something righteous and to pursue a better world and to bring forward a better world for their and the upcoming generation, they should ask the question of who is really stopping these places from being as accessible as they actually are. Because while detention centers do have a more rigid structure, you are allowed guests sometimes within your temporary accommodations, and you definitely are welcome into community centers who do a lot of work. Actually, they want their work recognized and they want their work out there and they want the time and kindness and consideration taken for them for the work to be amplified and to be echoed and to be shown. So I think for one, we need to ask the question of who is either masking these places as inaccessible or keeping them so. And secondly, why have we fed ourselves these fears that these places are inaccessible or it's these people are too vulnerable? Because since when was vulnerability not actually strength and not powerful in storytelling? So I think those things are for the people, as I said, who've made it their mission to create these little utopias of powerful storytelling to address, and not for us young people to say, hey, it's safe here, you can come and hang out with me. Because as I said, in the case of so many young people whose voices go unheard, and I know two Albanian young men who have committed suicide in detention centers. I know so many young women who were abused, raped, and molested in temporary accommodations and hostels. I know so many stories that have gone unheard. You need to find them. The adults and professionals out there need to find us. I shouldn't come to you. You should come to me because I need you.
We're coming out of a decade of some of the most degrading, miserable laws being passed about immigration and asylum in this country, culminating in the Rwanda bill earlier this year. And it's time for that to change. Time and again, polling in this country shows that people, although there are a hardcore of people who do think that people from other places just shouldn't be let in, the vast majority of people in this country have a broader and more open view. And that is especially true when they are speaking about an individual rather than a kind of spectral group of other people. We have to think about changing minds, and that has to begin with the personal, and rather than thinking about immigration or asylum in economic or kind of cold, sterile terms. That's not straightforward, and it asks an awful lot of the refugee themselves to personalize themselves, make themselves, palatable for an audience. And I think that all of us who work in the sector have a lot of work to do to mediate some of that storytelling, to take the pressure away from people being forced to put themselves out there as a kind of poster person for a more humane system. But I also think that changing the cultural framework of where this conversation sits, so rather than kind of us and them, it becoming an all of us, and recognizing the kind of creativity and passion and humanity of other people through any means they have of demonstrating those things. So art is one of the best ways there is to prove to one another that we are human and not just some AI platform. That's got to be the way that we change hearts and minds. And until we change hearts and minds, it's really hard to change the law. So there is enormous amounts of work to be done to bring everybody on board to recognizing the humanity of people that live outside of the edges of this island. But not as much work as I think people might fear, because ultimately, when faced with an individual human being, we recognize their humanity. That's what we do. We're human beings, that's how we operate. And that's what art is for.
I'm struck by just, there's the four of us here, and potentially that's what is needed, collaborations. I always think collaborations are the best. You need lawyers, you need Amina, you need someone to make the work, and you need someone to hold it all together and someone to show it. And, let's do it, bring it on more. Let's go into a detention center and go and tell some stories.
I really like that statement in the end that Polly just gave there. And I really like what Marianne said, that until we can change lots of minds, it is really helpful to change the law. I think that's, when I've met lots of artists just within the Young Citizens group, and lots of people who express themselves through different forms of art. And not only just lots of people who express themselves and who have a lot to say. And the beautiful things we could create if we gave more attention and power and love and more spotlight to that. And the many minds we could change, and maybe the laws that we could change, and the drive that would ignite in us to keep going and to make the world a little kinder. Because if we just light a candle in this dark room, no shadow would stand a chance against it. So I would really love to see other exhibitions, and I'd really love to see people just fanatically just going at canvases and expressing all that they've tried to hold back all of these years. And I'd like to see art as a form of therapy for asylum seekers and refugees, and I'd like to see it as a safe space for us as well, for all of us, not just for people who are unsettled or for people who are too settled, but for everyone, really, for everyone who believes that vulnerabilities can actually be strength, and for everyone who is willing and wants to fight to address unnecessary and illogical fears, and fears that are instilled to feed certain agendas, and barriers that are built to create more barriers and to make it more difficult for all of us, just because the system wants to shape us into a certain puzzle piece doesn't mean that we don't have all the tools to fight that. And actually, just be a painting, you don't need to be just a little wooden piece. So I'd really like to see more of that, and I'm so keen to do more of that as well. And honestly, for me, I just want to say that finding a place like I have at Coram, or I'm sure the Ukrainian girls have found with Polly, it's really what makes the difference. I really didn't know that I wanted to do a lot of art, or that I wanted to write a lot, or that I loved books before meeting my literature teacher and my art teacher. And I didn't know that I had the tools and the strength to strive for a better world until I met someone like Marianne and everyone at Coram, really, and other people in other organizations who have been so crucial in my life. So if we see you really, like, we've seen you fight our corner so much, and we're happy to kind of fight yours, and to, while we tell our stories, to also say that as part of our rights, we need you, and we need more people like you, and we need more initiatives and things like this in place. And not just I would love to see them, but I promise you that I'll keep asking for them. And if not me, the next me will get them. Maybe my sister will get them. So yeah,